Hi everyone. So now we have to talk about foreshortening. So while things like knowing the proportions of the body, the 8 heads method or the Loomis method, these are good starting points and they work very well when you're drawing a figure that's standing straight up and down. You get to something like foreshortening and things become a little bit more complicated when people are turning back in space. So last week we foreshortened with our bottle. So I don't know if you remember where we're looking at our bottle. This is not foreshortened, this is fully up and down, and then it gets more and more foreshortened the more that we turn it up into space. So the figure can do the same thing, and there are times where we have to apply perspective to the figure. That's a little bit more difficult to apply perspective to the figure because there's not a lot of straight lines, and the limbs can go in different directions. So I don't have that much of a great method for foreshortening the figure except for just looking and practicing. We can start similarly by trying to just block in something like the head. This person is very foreshortened in the face. So what I see when I see the head is I see this is all hair. I see a little bit of the forehead. This is the nose just peeking out, and then I just see the tops of the eyebrows. And I don't see anything else on her head. That's all I can see. By the way, when you go to get a foreshortened pose, I would suggest looking, it doesn't matter if you do a male or a female pose, but I would suggest looking first in the recumbent poses. Not all of the recumbent poses are foreshortened, but a number of them are. Probably more so than if you looked at another area. I'm gonna guess how far I can take the head as a single unit of measurement, and I could say how many heads until I get to the edge of the elbow. So we're going back for foreshortening. We're going back to our traditional measuring techniques. So this is one head, and it's just past one head. So the edge of the elbow comes about here. And I can do the same thing, use the head as a unit of measurement in other areas across the body. One thing that happens is her hand disappears behind her head, right at the base of her head right here. And then when her shoulder starts to come out on the other side of the head, it comes out closer in line to the edge of this shoulder. So not everything in this figure is foreshortened. The chest and the torso and the head are all foreshortened. Parts of the legs are foreshortened, but other parts of the legs I'm seeing entirely because of the way that she's leaning back. So it's important to understand what is and what isn't foreshortened. This is going to be about where her shoulder is. And the shoulder is foreshortened, and you want to figure out that angle that it's coming away. I think it's like this. Because what happens is her hand comes around her chest and actually there's a little negative space here. Negative spaces become very important when you're foreshortening. I'm also trying to keep this as light as I can. And I want to make changes. So I'm keeping it, I'm trying to make marks just about where things are. And obviously I want to get that as accurate as I can, but I also understand that there might be some initial problems with things. So I'm willing to make changes. And that's always an important thing to be able to do. So I think that her arm looks like that. It wraps around the front of her chest, and then where the shoulder meets the torso, it gets a little ambiguous in here. I can sort of see her sternum a little bit. I'm just going to indicate it. And then one more time I want to check this negative shape because this shape is important. And so far it looks pretty good. So I'm gonna sketch in where I think this elbow is and how it works. I know that it's got to come down to a very thin indication of the wrist or behind the head. I'm going to erase that so that it doesn't confuse me. That was my line originally of where I thought the elbow was. You can sort of see her shoulder here. So that looks so far so good. This is the part of her body that's the most foreshortened. And it's gonna look strange when I start putting in the legs, because especially this part of the leg, I see almost entirely. So it's gonna be strange how it seems proportionate in the figure. I don't know how long this leg is gonna be. I think it goes up to about here, but just to check, I'm gonna check with this head as a unit of measurement again. So I'll say, how many times does the head go into the leg? Almost 2, so 1. So just, I'll make it a little taller. There is a curve in the leg, but it's not nearly as pronounced as I just made it. And we have this lower part of the leg. There is some foreshortening on it. So do you see how now the head, the torso, these are very compressed, but because the leg is flipped up and facing us, we're seeing this entire leg. So it looks very awkward initially, and we're gonna have to figure out a way to make it look believable. This negative space between the two legs is going to be very important. And getting that proportion right is going to be very important. So I think that right away I see a problem with the leg, and I don't really want to change it, but I'm going to because I know that it's wrong. And it has to do with this negative space. This negative space does need to be more narrow, which means that, again, this leg has to come closer to the edge of the elbow. So I think that means that I'm going to be moving this part of the leg over a bit as well. And actually, yeah, so the leg comes just to the other side of where the sternum is. So that wasn't so bad. I saw that it was wrong and I changed it, and I'm better off for it, even though I didn't really want to change it. Now I want to measure, I'm not going to draw the contour of this leg, this lower part of the leg. I just want to get the angle right now, which is like this. Then I'll use the head as a measuring device again. How many heads is this lower part of the leg? See, it says it looks like it's also 2, and this was also 2, so I think that means that this leg actually isn't foreshortened. We're seeing the entirety of both parts of this leg. So that means this leg's going to be about the same length as the other. That's to the foot. So she must have her leg turned toward us. That is one disadvantage of drawing from a photograph as opposed to drawing from something that's three-dimensional, is that it's hard sometimes to figure things out like that because the camera is flattening things as well. So it's hard for me to tell in the picture if this lower part of the leg is fully facing us or not. And judging by the proportion, it seems like it would be, but I didn't initially read it that way when I was looking at the image. I also think I got the angle of this foot wrong. I think her foot is turning more out. That's good enough for the foot for now. I want to look at the negative space that's being created around this edge of the foot where it meets the other leg. We still have one more leg to get in here. So I'm looking at this shape that's created by this white space here, and I want to replicate it. I think that this shape is right, and now I want to say where this is going to be here. This comes up almost to in line with the like the back of the foot. And then I want to know where that other foot is. It looks like it's not quite on the same level as like the back of the leg. So where is this going to go? I think it's going to go up in this direction somehow. So I think it's going to be at like this level. So then I'm also going to look at this negative shape. So I'm combining a lot of different drawing elements here, a lot of different measuring systems that we've already talked about, because there's not a lot of theoretical systems that work great for this. It's mostly just about very careful observation and careful measuring. So here's my figure. One thing that happens when you draw these recumbent figures like this is that they often look pretty silly just floating on the page. So I might need to put her in some context. It looks like she's laying on a pedestal. I'm going to want to put that in the background. And that will make it look like it's not floating in space. And there's drapery, so you could put the drapery in the background. You can make it as detailed as you want. But before I put in any other details, I do want to check my measurements using measuring lines. So just like we did when we did all of our still life drawings, I can drop vertical and horizontal lines all over this figure to see if things are in the right place. And I'm not sure that they all are going to be. So let's start here with the top of the toe. In my picture, the top of the toe comes through the top of the knee, and I'm not sure that it actually does in the photograph, and it does not. So that means that this angle probably shouldn't be as steep as it actually is, or that just the knee should be lowered. If I lower the knee, I can make it reach the top of the foot without losing my proportion. But I think I also want to lower the foot a little bit as well so that they won't, or no, I don't, I need to raise the foot. So how am I going to do that? Yeah, so I think this angle that I had is just a little bit too steep. So it should be a bit. I want that top toe to come above everything else in the composition. I don't think this is so long. I'm going to compare the size of the foot to the size of the head. I'm not happy with the size of my foot. It should be a little bit smaller than the head. I think it's okay. It just doesn't look right to me, and I don't know why. I know that this negative shape is pretty right. And then if I follow the contours, this is a bit pointier. I'm going to leave it for now. I'm not pleased with it, but maybe if I fix some other things, I'll start to figure out what's wrong with that. So now I've got my top of my toe is not touching anything else, which is what I want. So now the next highest point is the top of that knee where I just was. And let's see what's not on the top of the knee now. And that is right now going through the exact part of the foot that I want it to be going through. I'm going to check this part of the foot. It looks okay, but it made me realize that I actually didn't have this negative shape as good as I thought I did. So what's the next point I can measure from horizontally? Maybe the elbow? So I have, the elbow does sort of come through this negative space in the leg, but it's much lower. And I think that what I did is that I didn't make this wide enough. So I think that if the top part of the leg just is made a bit wider, and already I'm starting to be happier with it. So for this foreshortened figure, you're going to want to put as many measuring lines as you can, or until you're happy with your proportion, until you're satisfied that you've locked in everything. You don't have to do shading on the figure, but I do want you to see, I want to see that you've checked the proportion again and again and again. And if you need shading, if things are not being made clear because of the lack of shading, you can put in a little bit. So for example, you'd probably read this whole image better if I did do some slight tonal variation where they're at least where my darkest darks are, and that might help it turn in space a little bit more. I'm not going to really work hard trying to make it look even, but I am going to just indicate where the darks are. And that'll help make it look like maybe there's a little light on the figure and you might understand what's happening spatially. This whole side of the shoulder is really dark and it starts to wrap around the figure a little bit. I also have like a shadow on the table, which maybe putting that in will help me understand things a little bit better. This underside of the back of the arm here, and this arm, there is this little bump in the elbow, but I made it way too pronounced. It's a lot more subtle. So already I feel that just putting a little bit of tone in here is starting to make things make more sense, but I'm not going to really make a complete shaded drawing out of this because you will be doing that for your next assignment this week. So for your final assignment, which is the one that we will look at in the next video, you can make your complete figure drawing with a foreshortened figure if you want, but you don't have to. I think I probably will, because for me they're the most fun to draw, even though they're challenging. But now we can draw two types of figures. We can draw a figure that's standing up straight and using this system of proportion and methods like the Loomis method, or we can draw a figure that's foreshortened and has to be observed on very careful, specific terms. All right, have fun.